Hello everyone, welcome to Eye on Africa. Here are your headlines on this Wednesday. The Ethiopian offensive on the northern Tigray region continues as aid groups say more than 11,000 people have now fled across the border to Sudan. A UN envoy for Libya says there has been a significant breakthrough at the talks on the country's future. And a new card game to celebrate black culture, how a young entrepreneur aims to educate people on the culture in Africa and its history. But first, more than 11,000 Ethiopians have fled to neighboring Sudan in the past few days as the army's offensive on the Tigray region shows no sign of slowing down. On Wednesday, the Ethiopian Air Force said it had bombed arms and fuel depots in the Tigray region. Hundreds are believed to have died since the offensive began. France 24's Maria Gert-Nicolescu was one of the few journalists who were able to make it to the region before being told to leave. She tells us more about her experience there.
We were able to go to Gondar, south of the Tigray border, as well as to Dansha, which is located in the Tigray region. And there are dozens and dozens of trucks and buses filled really with soldiers and the militiamen going from Amhara to Tigray. There's also a real mobilization in Gondar with residents donating their blood, collecting food, and so on. And from what we could see in Dansha, federal and Amhara forces have taken back the city, but outside of Dansha and in other parts of Tigray, fighting continues. According to an Ethiopian Air Force commander, arms and fuel depots were bombed on Wednesday in the northern part of Tigray. And another official said that the city of Humera, which is located close to the border with Sudan and Eritrea, had been taken back as well by federal troops. And government officials also said that 550 Tigray soldiers were killed since the beginning of the war, and that 17 military officials had been arrested for treason.
Maria, the international community has criticized the offensive. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has repeatedly justified the operation. Is there any reason to believe this could end soon?
Abiy Ahmed basically said that the war will end once the TPLF leaders had been disarmed and arrested. So it doesn't seem like he is willing to stop the military operation anytime soon and listen to the African Union, the United Nations, and so on. Also, with telecommunications still not working in the Tigray region, it's very difficult to verify a lot of information about who has the upper hand and where. And this is important because, for example, if other countries would enter the conflict, that would be an additional indicator that the war would continue. For example, it's quite unclear to what extent Eritrea has entered the war. Government officials are saying that federal troops had to retreat past the Eritrean border, and this could indicate some difficulties for governmental forces. But the president of the Tigray region, he said that Eritrean soldiers had entered Tigray to attack Tigrayan soldiers. So it doesn't seem like the end of it yet, and the government is increasing resource mobilization and is obviously keen on having the upper hand on the narrative on this topic.
NGOs are also worried that the violence there will lead to some kind of a humanitarian crisis. At last count, 11,000 people have already spilled over the border into Sudan.
In parallel to the fighting, which has already caused hundreds of deaths, there's already at least 11,000 Ethiopian refugees who are crossing the border to Sudan to find refuge since the beginning of the conflict. The UN reiterated their concern about civilians that are caught in the crossfire with no humanitarian access whatsoever to the Tigray region. There's also about 100,000 Eritrean refugees that are trapped in Tigray and that are in a very vulnerable humanitarian situation. So there are a lot of indicators that if continued, this war could have disastrous consequences on millions of civilians.
Zimbabwe's President Emerson Mnangagwa has said his country is ready to assist its neighbor Mozambique after it saw a wave of violence in the northern Cabo Delgado province. More than 50 people were beheaded over a period of 3 days by militants who are believed to have pled allegiance to the Islamic State group. Zimbabwe has a history of supporting Mozambique's government against armed rebels in the 1980s. A United Nations envoy for Libya says there has been a significant breakthrough in talks on the country's future. Participants at the conference in Tunisia have reached a preliminary agreement on a roadmap that will lead to parliamentary and presidential elections within 18 months. Many Libyans remain skeptical of peacemaking efforts, but the talks that began on Monday follow a ceasefire between the two rival parties that began last month. France 24's Fadil Ali Reza has more from Tunis.
This is a preliminary agreement on a roadmap for elections, but as the acting head of the UN mission for Libya, Stephanie Williams, said at a press conference tonight in Tunis, there is still ongoing discussion, especially on the executive branch and what that will look like in terms of its prerogatives, in terms of its competencies. And the delegates are being kept away from the press as they meet in a secluded hotel. So we're only getting official confirmation from the United Nations mission at the moment. But with regard to elections, this new announcement does appear to follow progress that has been made, following facts on the ground. New national elections had been planned, but they were delayed for several reasons. Most importantly, because of an assault on the capital Tripoli that was launched in April 2019 by General Haftar, which was finally rebuffed this summer after the intervention of Turkey. A ceasefire last month formalized the state of affairs, opening the doors for the current dialogue that we're seeing now in Tunis. So this preliminary agreement for elections would appear to put things back on track. The last national elections took place in 2014. The House of Representatives, that was for the House of Representatives. That body has never really had full power over the full of Libya, and it has been dogged by questions of legitimacy given the low turnout for those elections, for that election at that time, and the extension past its mandate. And while many are hopeful for the current dialogue that's going on now in Tunis, that it might build on peace, there are still concerns over whether deal might offer amnesty, especially for war criminals on either side. A prosecutor for the International Criminal Court today also announced that perpetrators in Libya would face prosecution for serious crimes committed over the last several years. And that comes one day after a prominent lawyer was assassinated yesterday in Benghazi by what the UN called unidentified men, one day after she threatened on social media to reveal the corruption by General Haftar in the east.
Ivory Coast rivals Alassane Ouattara and Henri Konan Bédié have, quote, broken the ice. That is according to a statement issued following a meeting between the two men. The re-elected president and Ivorian opposition member have been locked in a standoff since the presidential election last month. The 78-year-old won more than 94% of the vote, but opposition leaders had boycotted the election, accusing the incumbent leader of breaking two-term presidential limits. After their meeting, Ouattara and Bédié promised to press ahead with talks in order to resolve the political dispute.
Nous sommes convenus que la paix est la chose la plus chère à tous les deux et à tous les Ivoiriens. Et nous avons décidé d'œuvrer pour qu'il en soit ainsi.
Et que nous allons, dans les jours et les semaines à venir, continuer à nous téléphoner, à nous rencontrer pour que, enfin, le pays soit ce qu'il était avant.
Nigeria has ratified the African Continental Free Trade Area, becoming the 54th country in the African Union to do so. The trade deal commits countries to major tariff cuts within 5 years. The African Union believes it will boost trade by 60% within the continent by 2022. As of now, African countries only trade about 16% of their goods among one another, compared to 65% with European countries. Eritrea is now the only country which hasn't joined the deal yet. Talks continue to get all African Union members on board. The free trade area is set to begin on January 1st, but delays are expected. Finally, there's a new card game that's hitting stores across several countries. Fill in the Black is a game created by a young entrepreneur that aims to educate people on Black culture and African history. The game is being produced in Nigeria and has already sold copies in the UK, Canada, and the US. Nicolas Germain has the story.
These machines are producing a brand new game made in Nigeria. You need to make your partners guess a celebrity or a place, but without using certain obvious words. The specific feature here is that all the words that have to be found concern Africans or people of African descent. The game, called Fill in the Black, was invented by 28-year-old travel entrepreneur Funmi Oyatogun during the pandemic and soon after the death of George Floyd in the US. He was a black citizen who was killed by a white policeman who knelt on his neck. His death sparked worldwide protests whose main message was Black Lives Matter.
It was also during the pandemic that we had so many movements going on with people just, demanding for their existence to be recognized. People started to get a bit more conscious and a bit more vocal about telling black stories.
So far, Oyatogun has distributed over 1,000 decks in the UK, Canada, the US and of course Nigeria, where the game already has its fans.
I played it with my friends, brought us together. A lot of arguments sometimes get heated, and I don't usually like playing games, but this game was the one to play because it's about culture, it's about, the things that you know, and the things that you've also learned and heard about.
The game costs between $18 and $25 in various parts of the world. Oyatogun hopes to launch multilingual cards in the coming months, so that more people, she says, can have fun while celebrating black culture.
That does it for Eye on Africa. Thank you for watching. The news continues on France 24 right after this.
Je regarde France 24 parce qu'en tant qu'étudiante en sciences politiques, ça me permet de rester à jour sur les informations dans le monde, sur les conflits, les débats politiques, tout ça.
الاختلاف بين فرانس 24 والقنوات التانية في المحتوى المتنوع وفي التوجه الأقرب للحيادية.
I like their coverage, especially with the news and the politics, but also I like the cultural aspect because that, me as a Kenyan, I get to learn a lot about Francophone, Africa, Francophone in general, whether it's in Europe or here, just from France 24.
France 24 m'aide à voir une perspective plus complète du monde et à comprendre différentes langues et différentes cultures.
France 24, with you everywhere, all the time. Liberté, égalité, actualité.